Well, hello. Glad to have you joining us for this, our fifth week, where we have been focusing on the final teachings of Jesus. And during this season of Lent, I personally, and challenged several of you a few weeks ago, to be wrestling with this concept of what Jesus said in Luke 20, verse 25, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. What does that look like? And how can we do that joyfully and extravagantly? I think today we're going to see some helpful principles for that. So we're going to look at a story this week that I heard has been described as a Markan sandwich. M-A-R-K for the Gospel of Mark with an A-N at the end. A sandwich of Mark, if you want to say it that way, or a sandwich typical of others that are evident in the Gospels, in the Gospel of Mark. And it's where Mark mentions something significant to start a story, and then he switches to a closely related matter, but it's like the flip side of the coin, and it's designed to highlight the opposite of what the introduction focused on. And then at the end, he returns back to the first aspect in order to help us see, because of the contrasts, a principle and a truth that we should say, wow, I want to be like that and not like that. So let's take a look in Mark chapter 14. We're going to be reading through the first 11 verses here, all right? So this is what it says. And this is coming near the end of the Gospel of Mark. This is the week Jesus, he's already had Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. This is now just either 1 or 2 days, actually, before he ends up getting crucified. It all depends on how you interpret and how you read it, all right? But this is what it says, Mark 14, verse 1. Now, the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away. Now, that could mean today is 1 day and tomorrow is day 2, and so that's when the Passover happens. That would have been typical in Jewish culture, okay? And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people will riot. Well, while he was in Bethany, which is just a couple of miles outside of Jerusalem, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, back to the other part of the sandwich. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, came to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. So the first 2 verses, the religious leaders, they're troubled by how popular Jesus has grown. They are all conspiring together to eliminate Jesus. Why? Well, for the same reasons that we ignore Jesus. We just don't take it to the extreme of eliminating him. But we oftentimes ignore him because we're a little bit fearful, we're concerned that he might just ask us to do more than we would like to do. He might just ask us to give more than what we're comfortable giving. Then there are, after those first 2 verses, then there are 7 verses of extravagant devotion towards him from this woman, who John identifies as being Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And then after those 7 verses, the last 2 verses, verses 10 and 11, they focus on Judas's betrayal and the excitement, how the chief priests are just delighted that this is going to be happening. The Markan sandwich. Two verses, opposition to Jesus. 7 verses, extreme devotion to Jesus. 2 verses, more opposition to Jesus. Final opposition to Jesus. One of his close inner circle friends is going to be betraying him. So some versions say that the perfume was worth 300 denarii, and a denarius was worth about a day's wages and all. So if you do the math, it's maybe a little bit less than a year's wages. But the New International Version, which is the version that I use, and there are several other versions, just simplify it for us rather than say the perfume was worth 300 denarii. The perfume was worth about 100. About a year's wages, which helps us to understand it a little bit, all right? The perfume is described as being pure nard. I never looked it up until this week. But nard actually comes from a honeysuckle type plant that wasn't in that region of the Middle East. In fact, it grows at elevations at 9,000 feet and above. So if you connect the dots, almost certainly this perfume was extracted from plants raised in the Himalayan mountains in India, 3,000 plus miles away from Jerusalem. So this is a perfume that has been, almost certainly, it's been imported from a long ways away. And when it says alabaster jar, I'd never looked up that before. I had no idea what alabaster is. Alabaster is just it's a softer type of rock or a stone that can actually be carved. And what you could do with a chunk of it like this is you could carve out the middle of it and carve out maybe some of the edges so it's not quite so rough and all. And then after you carve out the middle of it so that there's actually a reservoir inside it, then you can heat that up with fire and eventually get it to be firm and solid again so that it won't soak up any liquid that would be poured into it like perfume. The alabaster jar represents the sum total of Mary's life. It could represent what we offer to God, the total of what we have to offer to Jesus. Now, some suggest that this perfume was like a family heirloom, that had gotten maybe passed down from a previous generation, perhaps from several generations. Perhaps it had been added to over the years as just little bits of this nard perfume had been brought in from India. Undoubtedly, this had to have been Mary's most valuable possession. I mean, imagine something sitting around your house that's worth $50,000. I mean, the concept of that is just lost to me. I've never had anything like that. It's just crazy. And so the crazy aspect of taking something that represents a whole year's wages and then just offering it, giving it up, well, the accusations start flying about how crazy that is. John tells us in his gospel, he tells us that the primary person who was opening his mouth, who's grumbling about this, is Judas Iscariot. Now, Judas Iscariot was like the treasurer for the 12 disciples. And John says he was a thief. Really, what he really wanted to do was be able to have that perfume, sell it, and then he'd have a much bigger stash of money to be able to, I don't know, steal somehow, okay? And he's the one that says, Mary, where's your sense of proportion here? This is a waste. And the Greek word for waste means something that is just actually just destroyed, all right? There will be nothing of value that is left after this perfume is poured out. Now, there's some things that you can buy and sell and use for a period of time and resell again later on, but there are some things that if you actually use that, there's nothing of value that's left. Well, spilled perfume on a human body and on shoes or on sandals and on feet and on sand on a hard Scrabble floor, it's done. You're not going to be able to recover that. There's no value left to it. He's just looking at it saying, $50,000 and it's now nothing. There's zero value left to it at all. He's indignant about it. And at face value, you want to know something? Judas's argument is one that I'd be prone to make. Because frugality and stewardship and moderation, those are significant values that I possess. Many of us do. You probably, several of you watching, are characterized by those values as well. A year ago, Nancy and I were visiting our daughter out in Southern California, and she said that she was going to be taking us out to eat at a nice restaurant. And of course, I'm pushing back on that. You know, I've got more money than she does and all, but she was insistent on it. And she took us to a chain. And I think there's one in the Twin Cities. It's called Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. You perhaps have heard commercials. Maybe some of you have actually gone to the restaurant. It's a pricey place to go. When we opened up the menus, it was like shocked to see how much a steak cost. I mean, the appetizers, the shrimp appetizers that we got, it was like, whoa, this is crazy expensive, all right? This is the very same Diana who, not born, but raised most of her life in Africa, saw poverty all around her on a regular basis. The same Diana who went with her African-based youth group on a food distribution where I was actually one of the chaperones, one of the coordinators of it and all. And we went out to the edge of the city that we were in during a year when there was significant famine and a lot of people hungry and without the ability to get food for themselves. And Diana went on that trip, and when we gave away an entire truckload of sacks of grain, there was nothing left that we could give. And there were hundreds of people around that hadn't gotten anything yet. And some of them are crying and they're yelling at us and begging for more. And we got in the truck and we drove away, and my daughter, she's just weeping. All these people struggling. And so several years later, we're visiting her out in California. We're going to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Well, she explained to us, Mom and Dad, don't worry about it. She worked for a company out there that gave her a Christmas bonus or a Christmas gift, and the gift was a $200 gift card to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. It was costing her absolutely nothing. And she said, buy whatever you want, eat whatever you want, whatever sounds good to you. Don't worry about the price. We're fine. And so we did. The shrimp was amazing. The one thing that I didn't get that I wished is when the waiter came by after eating the shrimp, I said, can you share with me the recipe for that shrimp? Diana's like putting her head down. Oh, no, not again, my dad. And he said, actually, I can't do that for you. But it was just amazing, amazing meal. I enjoyed the meal as far as the taste was concerned. But actually, there was part of me that struggled. There's part of me that was uneasy about this. $200 plus for a meal for 3 people? Too extravagant, too out of proportion, too totally at odds with our life experience living 11 years in one of the 5 poorest countries of the world. Out of step with reality, out of step with common sense. So, $50,000 worth of perfume all in one bottle poured out on one person in one setting, that would cross the line for me. That would probably cross the line for virtually any of us here at New Life Church. And so this is the part of this story where I look at, not at Mary, but I look at Judas Iscariot and I think, that looks like me. Those accusations of scandalous, extravagant, wasteful pouring out of a valuable product at $50,000, how much difference it could make in a small village with people who are struggling to get by. I mean, boy, we really want to spend that all in one sitting in a way that can't be recouped at all? Judas looks like me. I look like Judas. So I have to come to a greater grasp of why Jesus allows this and of what he says afterwards. And so let's consider that. Jesus defends her. Jesus defends Mary when the accusations start flying. He says, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. Essentially, he's saying, guys, this isn't inappropriate at all. Why not? Well, let's think about it. If we can back away from the dinner table a little bit, if we can back away from the house, if we can back away from the village of Bethany and see a bigger picture of what's taking place during that week that we call Holy Week, okay? Not just right then in Bethany, but what's going to be taking place in Jerusalem within 48 hours for sure. What's the bigger picture of what we would see? What does Jesus see? Well, Jesus knows, and if we did that, and well, actually from Scripture we do know now, because we have the benefit of hindsight, looking back from on something that took place in the past. So Jesus knew, and now we can see that in 2 days, Jesus is going to be offering himself totally, nothing held back, for the sake of mankind, to pay the price to restore our relationship with God. And when on the cross at Calvary, with his last lifeblood draining out of him, I ask you, what's going to be the value of what is left in that human body? It's going to be a lifeless corpse. So who's giving more? Mary or Jesus? Well, the answer can be seen perhaps in what is left after each of them give what they give. After Mary gives the perfume, what's left in her life? After Jesus gives his life, what's left in his life? Well, physically speaking, nothing's left for Jesus. His body is used up. There's no value there to a dead corpse. Mary's still alive. Mary still has a house that she's living in. Mary perhaps had other amounts of cheaper perfume. She had clothes. She perhaps had some furniture. We're not sure how much of a family that she might have. Actually, Mary's life still has quite a bit that she's blessed with. I mean, $50,000 is no chump change, all right? It's a good, I think that's a heavy amount to give up. But she's left with more than what Jesus physically is left with after he gives extravagantly. And the question comes to me, then who's more deserving of the gift that they're receiving? Mary's receiving the gift that Jesus is giving. That's a gift of sins forgiven and eternity in heaven. What's the value of the gift that Jesus has given? $50,000 worth of perfume. That the value is gone. So who's more deserving of the gift that they're receiving? Well, let's just be honest. For as wonderful as Mary of qualities that Mary had, she's a sinful person, and Jesus isn't. So really, he deserves the very best. And sinful people, what do we deserve? Damnation, to be totally honest. So the question is, whose gift is out of proportion to what is deserved? And it's not Mary's gift. The gift that's out of proportion is Jesus' gift. That's the extravagant gift. In fact, if you can back up to see the big picture, what Mary is doing for Jesus makes total sense. It's as if she's saying, Jesus, I understand what you're giving to me. This is what I offer, what I can give back to you. Nancy and I enjoy going to garage sales. I've shared that numerous times. And periodically we'd like to pop in at thrift stores, Goodwill, or Salvation Army, or a variety of others and on. And periodically we'll come across something that we look at and we say, wow, this is really going to be a good deal. Okay, this is like the best deal of the day. And on those periodic occasions, we'll go ahead and buy it, and then we'll be walking out to the car, and one of us will quietly say to the other one, start the car! Start the car! We say it real quietly, all right? And what we're doing actually is referring back to a commercial that the IKEA store had probably 10, 12, 15 years ago. And it's a story where a lady is at the checkout register buying stuff from IKEA, and she's given the receipt, and she looks at the receipt and she thinks, they undercharged me. That could not have been the total. But she's not going to be honest about that and ask the question, did you guys do something wrong here with it and all? She quickly and excitedly, she walks toward the door. As soon as she gets out the building, she's walking toward her car. She's yelling to her husband, who's waiting in the car, start the car! Start the car! And she celebrates like, I'm getting away with a great, great bargain. Well, Nancy and I do that. Well, start the car, start the car. It's one of these little inside jokes that we have that make us giggle, that we got a really, really good deal on what we just bought. In Matthew 13, long before Mark 14, in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus told two of his shortest parables, and they have a similar theme to them. And it dovetails with what we see in Mary's example here in Mark chapter 14. This is what it says, Matthew 13, verse 44. Jesus is teaching, and he says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. And when a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy, he went and sold all he had, and he bought that field. Again, verse 45, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. And when he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had, and he bought it. Finding a priceless treasure and being able to get it for a crazy bargain, even if the price is everything that you own, Jesus is saying, would be totally worth it. Mary found the treasure, friends. She found the pearl of great value. and giving her entire life savings, her family heirloom, her 401k retirement plan, her inheritance, whatever we want to call it. Yes, to be honest, it was all out of proportion. Not because it was too generous, but because it was nowhere near the value of what Jesus was giving to her. You see, this is what doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense either for Mary or for us to casually accept the incredible gift that Jesus is offering to you and then being totally unwilling to give anything of value back to him, or to throw a $5 bill in the offering box on a weekly basis as if, yeah, that's probably what Jesus' gift to me is worth, maybe $10 sometimes. When we do that, it just tells me that we have just zero understanding of the great value of a sacrifice. So the implied message of Mary pouring her perfume on Jesus, and the man selling everything for the field with the hidden treasure, and the merchant selling everything so that he could go back quick and get that pearl that was worth an incredible amount of money. The underlying message that Jesus is communicating is this. Jesus is saying, look at everything of value in your life. If there's anything that's too valuable to give me, then don't give it, but don't come and follow me. Now, lest you think that's too harsh, think about this. Your well-being was certainly in consideration in what could have been a similar conversation between Jesus and God the Father. At some point, the Trinity came up with the plan for, okay, here's how mankind gets reconciled with the Godhead. Jesus, you are going to go to the earth and you're going to die. You're going to give everything for mankind, sinful as they are. They don't deserve it, but that's the only way for that reconciliation, that relationship between us and God to take place. And it would be as if God says to Jesus, his son, Jesus, the only thing that works for me to be reconciled with sin-crazed humans is for you to give the most precious thing you have, your very life. And if you're not willing to give it to them for me, then don't go. But of course he did go. Now granted, imaginary conversation that probably didn't take place exactly quite like that. In a figurative sense, Jesus has his alabaster jar, in his hand as well. And he's on his way. During this dinner, he is on his way to Calvary to pour out, not perfume, to pour out his life for me. And for you. And when I think about that, Judas had it wrong. Mary had it right. And I'd like to be like Mary. So I ask you, what's in your alabaster jar? What is there in your life? What is there that maybe Jesus would prompt you to give back to him in an extravagant way? And you're hesitant to pour it out. You're kind of like Judas saying, oh, is there a better thing that we could do with this? Do we really need to give this? Or are you going to be like Mary? Just say, anything, Lord, anything that you expect from me, anything you ask of me, I give it back to you. What are you hesitant to put in your alabaster jar? What do you think would be just too much to give back to Jesus as an expression of gratitude for the gift that he has offered to you? If you have the attitude of, as a Christian, I guess I can't be doing that. As a follower of Jesus, I have to be doing this. As a believer, I know I need to stop going there. As someone who claims to be a follower of Jesus, I probably need to give up that website that I like to look at on my phone. If that's your inner attitude, or anything close to your inner attitude, you don't know what you've been given. It's like you think you've given up something of great, great value, and in return, God has offered to you a McDonald's Happy Meal toy. Friends, the most accurate picture of someone who understands the exchange that God is offering us, it's actually the picture, this is my opinion, it's actually, I think, the picture of the guy selling everything he has to buy the field with the hidden treasure in it. Because, this is what it says, when a man found it, he hid it again, and then, in his joy, went and sold all he had. At that moment in time, he had nothing left except the cash from the sale. And he goes and he offers it and he gets the field back. But he knows the value's not in the field, the value's in the treasure. And his joy is just like overflowing as he's giving up everything in order to get something of far greater value. Again, back to Jesus' teaching of give to God what is God's. Luke 20, verse 25. You can only do that with incredible joy if you have a deep sense of what you should be getting. And let's just be honest. What we should be getting as a recompense for our life of sin is eternal separation from God in hell forever. You can only give back to God what is God's with incredible joy if you have a deep sense of what you should be getting, but are fully aware of what Jesus is offering to you instead. So Mary gives this gift that represents her very life. And Jesus says, this is the most beautiful thing that's been done to me. Let me encourage you to take an inventory of your life, all right? Inventory of your situation. Look at every valued area of your life. And it might be like your favorite hobby or your favorite form of entertainment or your favorite possession or maybe something related to your job. It might actually be some of the idols that we can make of even family members. Look at every valued area of your life and ask these two questions. First, am I willing to do what Jesus says I should do here in this situation with this particular aspect of my life? Am I willing to do what Jesus says I should do here? And then the second thing is, am I willing to thank God for whatever happens here? Now, that first question focuses on our behavior, on our actions, on our external obedience. And it's true for many Jesus followers that we know we're doing some things that we shouldn't be doing. We are harboring a grudge against a family member. Really? We're underreporting on our taxes. No kidding? Really? We're deceiving our parents about what we're doing with our cell phone, or deceiving our spouse with what we're doing with our cell phone. But commitment to Jesus is more than just avoiding the behaviors that make us less of who we were created to become. Avoiding wrongdoing is only the negative side of commitment. There's a positive side of commitment as well. And the positive side of commitment is something along these lines. I gave up what seemed to be a lot, but in return, I gained joy and hope and peace and meaning for life. Not to mention an eternity in paradise. The positive side is I get the field with the hidden treasure. I get the pearl of great price. And all I had to give up was my alabaster jar and whatever God led me to put in it. There was a missionary from the 1950s who went to South America, well known. His name was Jim Elliot. And he was actually, he had a journal that got published years afterwards. And this is one of the things that he wrote in his journal when he was in his 20s. He wrote, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Well, what Jim Elliot actually gave up was his life. He was martyred there in the jungles of South America by a native tribe that was there, many of whom eventually came to Jesus Christ and repented of their sin against him, repented to his wife, confessed their involvement in that. But think about what Jim Elliot gained. An entire eternity in paradise with God. All because he was just willing to give up something he wasn't going to be able to hold on to past his last breath anyways. Somebody who gave far more to you than you could ever give back to him from your alabaster jar. Well, I think he deserves your full commitment. I know he deserves mine. And the world might look at our devotion to him, our willingness to sacrifice our favorite vacation, or to postpone the buying of the car that we'd like to get, or whatever it is that God tells us, would you give it? Would you sacrifice this? Would you just be all in? Whatever he lays upon our heart, the world might look at that and say, how crazy is it? That's just totally out of proportion. It's just radical nonsense, but I know better. And you do too. Because the reality is no matter how much we give to him, we still haven't given back even a fraction of what he's given to me. Whatever we might perceive to have been the value of that alabaster jar of Mary's. Well, what she poured out on Jesus doesn't scratch the surface of what he poured back into her life. I want to be like her. I hope you do too. Let's pray. Father, in a world that scoffs at our commitment to our Savior, if we could get a bigger picture, the way that you ultimately had a big picture of what was taking place there at that meal, if we could have that bigger picture, we wouldn't join in the chorus of Judas saying, what about frugality? What about moderation? What about stewardship? What about helping poor people? And of course, we need to be doing that. We wouldn't echo his words. We would look at it and we'd say, wow, Mary, that's an incredible expression of love to somebody who is showing a great amount of love to you as well. And we want to be like you. So reveal that to us, God. Whatever is within us that hesitates taking and putting in our figurative alabaster jar and offering it up to you, God, release our hold on those things and allow us to be able to see the incredible value of what we're being offered, what we've been promised, what we've been given by you. We offer ourselves totally back to you, God, in whatever way you choose to ask of us. That's my desire, to give back to you what is yours. And I hope it's the desire of each person watching today. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. So next couple of weeks are going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be on vacation next week, and then the following week we're actually having a presentation here about a recent missions trip that we took down to the Twin Cities. Some of the people from our church, and also messages. And what we post online is going to be a little bit different until between now and Easter Sunday. I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless you all.